Sometimes it takes an upheaval to uplevel. The forced shift to remote working in 2020 has unlocked potential opportunities for innovative companies. How have smart companies turned the post pandemic world to their advantage? And what can your firm learn from them? We'll discuss this and more with Choose to Think co founder Ramanand. Hi, Ramanand. Welcome to this Smartcast.
Thanks, Anasi.
So, Choose to Think has been remote first since the very beginning, since 2014. Was that by chance or was that a deliberate choice?
No, it was a very deliberate decision. Our previous corporate experiences have left us, you could say, with a distaste for conventional thinking on how email is used for communication and for task management, work from home policy, the fact that flexibility is sometimes not given the importance that it should be. And sometimes there is this theater around work rather than the impact of your work. So, uh, when we had a chance to design something from first principles, out went email for us. We started using a very specific task management system. We went in with an approach of remote first. Whatever we do, unless it requires us to absolutely be in front of someone, we should be able to access, we should be able to interact using a remote first mode. And I think we saw that as the wave of the future. A lot of the things that people were doing, they didn't need to happen in person. And I think in some sense, our personalities were also tuned for it. So ultimately, we designed for what works for us best. Autonomy, flexibility, ability to think before you jump into a meeting and you communicate. So all those were big design decisions that worked, that we incorporated. So from that point of view, 2020 was just another year for us, unlike for a lot of other people. And in fact, I now just think of it as work that happens in a distributed manner rather than calling it remote, because that has its own connotations.
Right. In fact, in 2020, that's what we felt that at Choose to Think, everyone is now on board with how we function every day. So nothing changed for Choose to Think. As people moved, as knowledge workers moved to remote working, there were difficulties. All of us know that, but there were also some wonderful advantages. So, what do you think companies gained from going remote or going distributed, as you mentioned?
Right. So, often there are these moments which just make you confront a lot of the assumptions that you have at the back. So, years and years of history of corporate organizations just let people believe that this is the only way to do something. So, if you look at previous generations, they felt that a certain amount of working hours, morning to evening, you had to be out of the house, and that is what work meant. If you were sitting at home and doing, you were probably doing something substandard, or you were doing it until you looked for something called as real work, right? And a generation before that, you probably saw that people worked from their homes. So my grandfather, for instance, was a doctor, and he had a clinic as part of his house, and that was normal for him. He wouldn't have to go somewhere to run a clinic. So these things change, but I think events like what we had in 2020 just force you out of that shell, make you look at the world in a completely different lens. I think that is hopefully what companies gained out of it, whether they want to go back to what life was before 2020, or they want to invent something different. At least they will have been shaken out of that complacent kind of mode. So I think many of them acknowledged what many of us, especially companies like Choose to Think, knew, that if you had the right kind of people and you'd chosen them for their skills and their ability to get things done and their ability to learn, that they would get work done. They would figure out ways to navigate these treacherous straits, and they would come on the other side, a changed kind of entity. Every adventure starts with this kind of conflict, and I think that's what they got. So a lot of people that we know, a lot of leaders we know, started re-examining what is important to them and what really has an impact. So for instance, some asked, do people really need to spend so much time with each other to build bonds? So some said, yes. I think in our situation, uh, you know, let's say we are a software company and there are a lot of escalations, or a very rapidly moving kind of company, then we need to kind of have the brains trust together and work together. And now that is a deliberate decision. So they found out ways to enable that. But for others, they figured out that they really don't need to have this close bonding every day. That is overwhelming for the kinds of people that work there. So people we've talked to some marketing and sales people who were pleasantly surprised that they could actually do this, and they could also strip away a lot of the baggage that goes with their job, like long hours of travel just for that 1 hour call. So those things actually got stripped away, and the conversations became much more uh, personal. The good ones, the good people actually figured it out. So one example here was clients trying to look at their talent management approach for newcomers in a very different way. So we posed the question to them as, what do you need to do to set these people up for success in that first 90-day, first 6-month period? And one of the things that we realized was that more than anything else, these newcomers want to meet leaders in the organizations. So then we set up leadership contact sessions. We enabled new leaders to build their own visibility in that first 90 days very deliberately. So just to go back to your questions, it gave people a fresh perspective and a lot of new lessons to re-examine the past.
And do you think remote working affected the internal culture of companies as well?
To an extent, yes. I think it made them conscious that you need to keep nurturing culture. It is not something that you set up once and it kind of goes on its own. So, to give you another example, one company decided that it had to double down on its cultural values this year. They had this wonderful office space, a lot of things that they had done there to evoke these kinds of emotions and feelings connected to that value. But then suddenly take that out, and what are you left with? You don't have channels to engage these people. So uh, no, so one thing that we helped them do was collect a lot of these of stories of these values in action, and not just in 2020, where yes, there was a lot of people were behaving, they went out above and beyond what they were needed. But when they look back, they had stories from 2016, 2018, 2014, back to the founding of the company. They were all a series of activities that they had done, but some were done by accident. And now they realize that no, we need to nurture culture more in a more conscious way. And So what we did was we said, why don't you collect all these stories, put them up somewhere, that your newest employee who's perhaps working 100 miles away, or maybe is on a different continent, because now suddenly you hire the best in the world, can still have that same sense of what this company stands for through these stories. And so the thinking around culture, I think, should now change from engagement, which was thought as we will connect with people, our employees, we will do an event, we'll collect some feedback, and we'll go away. But instead, companies not only need to add this digital flavor, but they also need to think like marketers, religious, figures, politicians who kind of all mastered the art of influencing at scale, um, and influencing people who are invisible to them. You're not in the same room, but you follow an actor to the ends of the earth, or you follow a figure to the end of the earth. I think that is what they're trying to do. And I mean, just to wrap up this answer, um, I think we said that why don't you look at this as um, something like a radar, right? Or like one sense has shut down, but another sense has now it's time to activate that other sense. So you may not be able to see and meet people in person. There are other channels that you can kind of gauge intelligence from, and I think it's been a cultural awakening. I should probably put it in a very grand way, that way, but I think it has affected them, and I hope they take the right lessons from it.
I think that's interesting. We hadn't really realized that the forces needed, the methods needed to do this. A lot of people, like politicians and media people, keep doing this to their followers. So now companies have to go through the same media, through the same medium to connect with their followers through a digital medium. And tell me about we spoke about engagements, but also online learning, which it used to happen in companies to an extent because they already had an e-learning component. But did things change during this remote setup?
So by all accounts, online learning, the uptake of online learning has surged. It could be because people had more time, or because they didn't have to commute as much. Maybe there was the sense that the world is changing and we need to catch up. Maybe there was this latent desire that got unlocked last year. Um, my feeling is that on one side, people are racking up these certifications because service providers have made it very easy to get to the finish line. Learning is often very hard, but if you make it such that there are rewards and it is just very easy, it's just you sit on, it's like a slide, you sit on it and you sooner or later you make it to the other side. A lot of the certifications or the learning outcomes have been in that space. So, in fact, we have been running some cool experiments with some clients. So, for instance, one was around onboarding freshers. So, they usually had something like a boot camp. 3 weeks you put these new college hires and you throw a lot of information at them. So now suddenly we said, can you reimagine that a little bit? And can you say that uh, what is it that these people will need in the next 1 year in terms of succeeding here? Plus, what is it that you want to leave them with? What do you want to influence them with? And so we ran something like a post onboarding exercise channel. There were a bunch of exercises that happened after you finished your onboarding for the first couple of weeks, and then there was a series of exercises that helped you kind of connect with different people in the organization, almost like an adventure. In another case, learning for senior folks who are very busy. In fact, lot of people felt that 2020 was very overwhelming. People were packed because uh, they really found themselves having a lot of time. They were not commuting. There were no natural breaks. So they ended up working a lot. And that actually had the opposite effect on learning for some of these senior folks because they were just stretched. So another experiment that we've been running is what we call this on-stage, off-stage kind of way. Uh, a mix of asynchronous and asynchronous learning, where you come together at specified intervals, and that's like being on stage, where you're doing things together, you're performing something, you're learning something, and you come back and you perform better the next time. But then you go off stage, and then there are a bunch of things that you do at your own convenience with the right prompts along with some of your teammates. And then what it does is this interplay, this balance between doing things in a workshop versus going and ruminating off on your own, uh, sometimes with a group of people, is a very powerful idea. And I think, again, because remote working has enabled people to kind of control their time a little bit more, we are trying to ride on that. And finally, I think people have kept learning and engagement as two very separate pieces, right? They think of one as very serious and the other as being very for your the fun Friday kind of a thing. But we found that uh, there are a lot of there's a lot of interest, especially now, in putting both of them together. So we have been uh, doing something in what we call curiosity cafes, where it's a mix of learning, engagement, cultural influence, all that in one package, also which is different each time. You might be reading something, you might be listening to a podcast in one session, you might be playing a game, you might be doing a strategy kind of a session in one. So I think what people are looking for is, now that you have the world at your fingertips, you have the time, there is no reason why I should listen to a trainer. I can go and listen to the best possible educator in the world. What you're now looking for is something that works for your company, your context, and also brings people together and does all of them in one go. And I think that is what a lot of interesting learning developments are taking place in that way.
So I think that's we saw that with the kids at home also, which was there was a blurring of the boundaries between what is office and what isn't, and that I
Correct.
think spilled over into what is fun and what is work also, because that thing also to an extent I think initially they were also, when we were talking to company heads, there was also this idea of like flipped classrooms, of flipped
Right.
workplace where you come together for fun activities and you go back to work and or
Correct.
back home for
So
serious.
there is always this combination, right? So people say that work is great when it's fun, and something when you learn if it's fun, you tend to stick at the harder parts longer. So some of these have been very artificial boundaries, and I think it's partly because people didn't have the right tools, or people didn't just think of them like that, and it is all legacy. And then something like this comes along and just gives you permission to think of new ways to get to your destination. So uh, that's what we've seen. A lot of the brighter, the more innovative companies look at this and say that, hey, look, let's look at it as an adventure rather than something that you're just so anxious about that you fail to grasp that opportunity.
Going ahead, I think there's no doubt that this is going to have a massive, I mean, in the mindset at least, it's going to have a massive role to play because we can't go back to how things were. And remote working in some form of the other is going to be here to stay. So if you plan it right, there are gains. There are in fact great gains that you can make out of it, so that it works for you instead of you feeling that it's working against you. So some of our listeners are leaders, they are organizational designers who are looking for advice on how to further navigate, how to go ahead in these stormy waters. So can you give us some, say, 3 tips for them?
So I think they need to start with the right mindset, because that is going to define whatever else they do from here onward. So embrace this new world. Find your own version of it that works for you. Find out what your organization cares about and constantly experiment. So I choose to think, uh, we know that because we are all distributed, we need to make time to spend with each other in some form or the other. We also pride ourselves on helping others with their future relevance. So we need to think about our own future relevance. So how do we put all of these things together? So we started a series, about a year and a half ago, called Future Rings, where each day one of us responds to a question about the future, and then we all take turns to talk about it. So it's an experimental mindset. It's something that embraces it. It leans into it, as they say, rather than trying to just wish for the days back. You may go back to those days, but you want to not let go of these gains, as you put it. The second is going with the right tool set. So going remote or distributed means getting the right tools in place. So what I sometimes find lacking in these, this the class that we spoke about, the leaders, the designers, is that they don't often get their hands dirty. The really good leaders, what they do is they are still experimenters or tinkerers at heart. And so if they hear of a new tool, they will install it, they will try it out. Even if it is something like Microsoft Teams and Slack or Zoom, they will go fiddle around with all the options. They won't hesitate to do that. And sometimes I don't see enough people doing that. So I would say try out these community apps, try out these bots, try out a variety of them, because uh, that is going to be an integral part of. It's like using Microsoft Word a decade or two ago, right? Today, you wouldn't hire anyone who said, I don't know how to use Word, or I'm not interested in using Word. You would look at them and say, what is wrong with you? So, the right tool set is the second thing. And finally, I think that newcomers' approach to building skills. So, take that approach, say that, okay, there is a lot that I don't know, and there's a lot that is shifting around me. So, if you are, it's by like being an airdropped in a new country, right? You find yourself there. You have to learn the language. You have to learn the unspoken norms and etiquettes of that place. You may have to, find newer things to eat and drink. The film sound different. So look at it that way. So instead of feeling lost and scared, you say, what would I do if I was a tourist in this new country and I'm going to be here for 6 months? So I teach myself things like, maybe better writing, expressing via, yourself through video, like what we are trying to do here, or, just trying to figure out what is it that this new country needs so that you can survive and flourish here. So that is what I would encourage all our listeners to do.
So right mindset, right tool set, and right skill set, as you put it absolutely wonderfully. And thank you so much. I think these are fabulous tips. This is a topic that we will keep revisiting as the paradigm shift and going ahead as we evolve in this world. So thank you so much to help for helping us navigate through these. And I'm sure we will talk more about this in the months ahead. So thanks a lot, Raman. Thanks.